The storm's gift. The first warning came as a distant rumble over the sea. Prisha Mehta looked up from the young tomato plants she was tending, feeling the shift in the air. The coastal town of Maplewood rarely saw severe weather, but today's forecast had promised an unusually powerful storm. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, rolling in faster than expected. 5 more minutes, she murmured to herself, quickly finishing the last row of seedlings in the community garden she'd established 3 years ago. At 32, Prisha had built a modest reputation as a skilled botanist who had transformed an abandoned lot into a thriving green space that fed both body and soul for many in the struggling town. The first heavy drops began to fall as she gathered her tools. By the time she reached the small wooden shed at the garden's edge, rain was sheeting down in silvery curtains, and the wind had picked up enough to bend the tallest sunflowers. Prisha ducked inside, watching through the small window as pedestrians scattered, seeking shelter. That's when she noticed him, a small figure huddled beneath the inadequate protection of the bus stop across the street. A child, alone in the deluge. This is how bad decisions start, Prisha muttered, grabbing her raincoat and the large umbrella she kept for garden tours. Without hesitation, she plunged into the storm. The boy couldn't have been more than 8 years old. Soaked to the skin and trembling, his eyes widened as Prisha approached, her yellow raincoat bright against the gray downpour. "Hi there," she said, crouching to his level. "Are you okay? Where are your parents?" "I'm Theo," he whispered, voice barely audible over the rain. "I got off at the wrong stop. My dad's at work, and my phone got wet." He held up a waterlogged smartphone, its screen dark. "That's okay," Prisha said, offering a reassuring smile. "My garden shed is just across the street. It's dry and warm, and we can figure out how to contact your dad. Would that be all right?" Theo nodded, his dark curls plastered to his forehead. Prisha extended the umbrella over him, and together they crossed the street, leaning into the wind that threatened to snatch the umbrella away. The shed wasn't much, but it was dry and cozy. Prisha had outfitted it with a small electric heater, a kettle, and a comfortable chair for her breaks. She handed Theo a clean towel kept for rainy days and made him hot chocolate from the supplies she stored for garden volunteers. "So, Theo," she said as color returned to his cheeks, "do you know your dad's phone number?" The boy shook his head. "It's in my phone, but I know he works at Horizon Technologies in the tall building downtown. His name is Adrian Reeves." Prisha blinked in surprise. Everyone in Maplewood knew of Adrian Reeves, the reclusive tech entrepreneur who had moved to their quiet town 2 years ago and established his company headquarters in the renovated lighthouse building. Rumors swirled about him, a widower, intensely private, brilliant, but distant. "Well, that's helpful," she said, pulling out her own phone. "I'll call his office." After several transfers and explanations, Prisha finally reached someone who confirmed that Mr. Reeves's son was indeed missing, and that Mr. Reeves was frantically searching for him. They took Prisha's information and assured her that Mr. Reeves would come immediately. While they waited, Prisha distracted Theo by showing him her collection of rare seeds and telling him stories about the garden. "These will grow into giant pumpkins," she explained, showing him a jar of seeds. "Every October we have a carving contest." "Dad and I never carve pumpkins," Theo said quietly. "He's always working." The sadness in his voice struck Prisha. "Well, you're both welcome to join us this year," she offered. The storm continued to rage, but inside the small shed, surrounded by the earthy scent of soil and seeds, Prisha and Theo created a pocket of warmth and safety. 20 minutes later, the sound of tires on wet gravel announced a visitor. Prisha peered through the rain-streaked window to see a sleek black car pull up. A tall man in a soaked business suit emerged, not bothering with an umbrella as he scanned the garden frantically. "Dad," Theo cried, recognizing the figure. He rushed to the door and flung it open. Adrian Reeves turned at the sound, his face transforming from panic to profound relief. He dropped to his knees in the mud as Theo ran into his arms. Heedless of the rain still pouring down, Prisha stood in the doorway, watching their reunion with a smile. When Adrian finally looked up at her, his eyes held a gratitude so intense it almost made her step back. "You found my son," he said simply, his voice rough with emotion. "Actually," Prisha replied, "I think he found me." And as the storm raged around them, something else entirely began to take root. Blooming connections. The morning after the storm dawned clear and bright, as if the previous day's tempest had been nothing but a distant dream. Prisha arrived at the community garden earlier than usual, eager to assess any damage. The rain had been a blessing for most plants, but she worried about flooding in the lower beds. She was surprised to find someone already there, a small figure carefully picking up fallen branches near the butterfly garden. "Theo," she called, setting down her bag. The boy turned, his face lighting up. "Miss Pritt, Dad said I could come help. He's parking the car." Before she could respond, Adrian Reeves appeared around the corner of the garden fence. Unlike yesterday's drenched businessman, today he wore casual clothes jeans and a simple blue button-down with rolled-up sleeves. It softened his appearance considerably, though his posture still carried the unmistakable confidence of someone accustomed to commanding rooms. "Good morning," he said, approaching with an outstretched hand. "I wanted to properly thank you for yesterday. I'm Adrian Reeves." "Prisha Mehta," she replied, taking his hand. His grip was firm but gentle. And there's no need for thanks. I'm just glad Theo was safe, nevertheless. Adrian glanced around the garden, taking in the neat rows of vegetables, the flowering fruit trees, and the small pond at its center. This is impressive. Theo hasn't stopped talking about your seeds and stories. Dad, can I show you the pumpkin seeds? Theo tugged at his father's sleeve. Adrian smiled down at his son, a genuine smile that transformed his serious face. In a minute. First, I wanted to ask Miss Mehta if we could help with the storm cleanup. Prisha hesitated only briefly. She usually preferred working alone in the early mornings, finding peace in the repetitive tasks of gardening. But the eager look on Theo's face decided her. I'd appreciate that, she said. There's quite a bit to do. For the next 2 hours they worked together under Prisha's guidance. She showed them how to check which plants needed staking after the wind, how to clear debris without disturbing beneficial insects, and how to identify which puddles needed drainage. Adrian proved to be a quick learner, asking thoughtful questions about plant care and garden design. So this entire project was your vision? He asked as they rested on a bench, watching Theo carefully water a patch of carrots as Prisha had shown him. Not entirely mine, Prisha corrected. The community had been talking about wanting a shared garden space for years. I just happened to have the botanical knowledge and enough stubbornness to make it happen. You're being modest, Adrian observed. I've done my research this morning. You transformed an abandoned lot into a food source for local families and a teaching space for schools. That takes more than stubbornness. Prisha felt her cheeks warm under his direct gaze. You did research on me, on the garden, he clarified, though his slight smile suggested otherwise. I like to understand the background of remarkable things when I encounter them. Their conversation was interrupted when Theo came running over, excitement bubbling from him. Miss Pritt, I found a caterpillar. Is it going to be a butterfly? She leaned down to examine the tiny creature crawling on the leaf Theo held. Actually, this one will become a moth, a lunar moth. They're rare and beautiful. Can I keep watching it? Of course. Just be gentle and return the leaf where you found it when you're done. As Theo carefully walked back to his discovery spot, Adrian's phone rang. His expression shifted instantly, the warmth replaced by the businessman's mask as he answered. Prisha busied herself with a nearby rosemary bush, trying not to eavesdrop, but catching fragments about meetings and development timelines. When he ended the call, he sighed. I'm afraid we need to go. There's an emergency at work. On a Saturday? Prisha asked before she could stop herself. Technology never sleeps, he replied, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Theo, time to go, buddy. The disappointment on Theo's face was palpable. But Dad, we just found the caterpillar. Adrian checked his watch. I'm sorry, but this is important. We'll come back another time. Prisha watched the familiar scene unfold, a child's interests subordinated to adult priorities, and felt a tug of sympathy for both father and son. No, she said impulsively. I'm hosting a seedling workshop for kids tomorrow afternoon. Theo would be welcome to join, if he's interested. Theo's eyes brightened immediately. Can I, Dad, please? Adrian hesitated. I'd need to find someone to bring you. I have meetings all you could come to, Prisha suggested, surprising herself again. Many parents participate. It might be a nice break from technology. Something shifted in Adrian's expression, surprise, followed by consideration. What time? 2 o'clock, right here in the garden. After they left, Prisha wondered at her own boldness. Adrian Reeves was clearly married to his work, and she'd never been one to push people beyond their comfort zones. Yet there was something about the way Theo lit up in the garden, and the glimpses of warmth she'd seen in his father, that made her hope they would return. To her astonishment, at precisely 1:55 the next afternoon, both Reeves arrived at the garden gate. Adrian carried a sleek leather notebook and wore what appeared to be designer casual wear, still overdressed for gardening, but an effort nonetheless. We brought cookies, Theo announced, holding up a bakery box. Dad said we shouldn't come empty-handed. That's very thoughtful, Prisha said, accepting the offering with a smile. The workshop brought together a dozen local children and their parents. Prisha demonstrated how to plant seedlings, explaining the science of germination in simple terms. When she paired everyone up to practice, Theo naturally gravitated toward his father, watching Adrian Reeves, reportedly worth billions, kneeling in the soil, carefully following his son's enthusiastic if messy instructions. Prisha felt something unexpected bloom in her chest. The man's focus was complete, his attention fully on his son rather than his phone or the business world he commanded. Later, as the workshop wound down and other families drifted away, Adrian approached her, a small pot with a newly planted sunflower seedling in his hands. Theo wants to keep this at home. Is that permitted? Of course, Prisha nodded. That's the point, to spread the joy of growing things. Adrian looked at her thoughtfully. You've done that today. I've never seen him so engaged. Plants have a way of connecting us to something essential, Prisha replied, something we often forget in our busy lives. I'd like to learn more, Adrian said suddenly, about your work here, the community impact, perhaps over dinner this week. The question hung between them, layered with possibilities beyond professional interest. Prisha felt herself at a crossroads, aware that accepting might pull her into a world vastly different from her own. Dinner would be nice, she answered finally, to discuss the garden. Adrian smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his face. Of course, just the garden. But as they parted ways, the seedling carefully cradled in Theo's small hands, Prisha knew that something else entirely had begun to take root between them, something both promising and complicated, like the most challenging of her botanical projects. Seeds of change. The restaurant Adrian chose for their meeting. Prisha couldn't bring herself to call it a date. Overlooked Maplewood's small harbor. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, fishing boats bobbed gently on the evening tide, their lights twinkling against the darkening water. It was elegant without being ostentatious, a place Prisha had passed often but never entered. "I hope this is acceptable," Adrian said as they were seated at a corner table. "I'm told they source most ingredients locally, including from our community garden," Prisha confirmed. Noticing the restaurant's menu proudly listed her project among its suppliers, "They buy our heirloom tomatoes and herbs." Adrian looked pleasantly surprised. "I didn't realize. That makes this choice more appropriate than I knew." There was an awkward moment as they settled in, the silence filled with unspoken awareness that this meeting straddled multiple purposes. Prisha smoothed her simple green dress, feeling simultaneously overdressed compared to her usual gardening attire and underdressed next to Adrian's tailored suit. "How's Theo's sunflower doing?" she asked, finding safer ground. Adrian's expression softened immediately. "He's been measuring it daily and keeping a growth journal. I had to institute a rule against waking me before 6 a.m. to report its progress." Prisha laughed. "The enthusiasm of children is wonderfully relentless." "Speaking of relentless enthusiasm," Adrian said, reaching into his briefcase, "I've been thinking about your garden project." He placed a sleek folder on the table between them. Inside were architectural renderings of what was unmistakably her community garden, but expanded, enhanced, with greenhouse structures, irrigation systems, and educational spaces she had only dreamed about. "What is this?" she asked, fingers hovering over the beautiful drawings. "A proposal," Adrian replied. "Horizon Technologies has a sustainability initiative that needs a flagship project. We provide funding and technical support. You maintain creative control and community focus. It's a partnership that could transform what you've built into something that could feed hundreds more families and serve as an educational model." Prisha studied the plans, her initial excitement giving way to uncertainty. This would change everything. "For the better," Adrian added. "Imagine what you could accomplish with proper resources." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of their meals. Locally caught fish for Adrian and a vegetable risotto for Prisha, made with ingredients she had likely harvested herself days earlier. "Why my garden?" she asked after they had begun eating. "There must be more prestigious environmental projects you could attach your company's name to." Adrian considered his answer, setting down his fork. "2 reasons. Professionally, it's perfect local impact, educational component, food security, all buzzwords our board loves." He paused. "Personally, I saw how that garden affected Theo. He's been different since that day in the storm, more engaged, less attached to screens. You created something that reached him when nothing else has since his mother died." The mention of Theo's mother hung in the air between them. It was the first time Adrian had referenced her directly. "I'm sorry about your wife," Priscilla said quietly. "Cancer," Adrian replied, his voice steady but with an undercurrent of old pain. 3 years ago, Theo was 5. He barely remembers her now, which sometimes feels worse than if he were actively grieving. "And you?" Priscilla asked gently. "Do you still grieve?" Something flickered across Adrian's face, surprise at her directness. "Perhaps. I grieve the woman I lost. Now I mostly regret the time I didn't spend with her, always believing there would be more." He looked out at the harbor. "That's the curse of ambition. You're always living in the future while the present slips away." Prisha nodded, understanding more than he might have expected. "My father was the same way. Brilliant engineer who was going to retire early and finally travel with my mother. He died of a heart attack at 52, retirement plans untouched." Adrian turned back to her. "Is that why you chose this life? Gardens and community rather than corporate advancement?" "Partly," she admitted. "I had the fancy degree and the promising career track at a pharmaceutical company, developing plant-based medications. But it felt like I was putting all the meaning off until some future date. The garden began as a weekend project and became ... everything." Their conversation flowed more easily after that exchange of vulnerabilities, moving between personal stories and professional passions. Adrian spoke of growing up poor, his drive to succeed, and his struggle to balance that ambition with fatherhood. Prisha shared her journey from corporate research to community activism, and her vision for food security in underserved areas. By dessert, the proposal sat between them, no longer just a business proposition but something more complex and personal. "I need time to think about this," Prisha said finally. "It's not just my decision. The garden belongs to the community." "Of course," Adrian nodded. "Take all the time you need." He hesitated before adding, "But regardless of your decision about the proposal, Theo has been asking when we can return to the garden. Perhaps next weekend." The question carried weight beyond a simple scheduling request. Prisha understood he was asking if their connection could continue, separate from the business proposition. Sunday afternoons, I host an open garden session, she replied. Everyone is welcome. I think Theo would enjoy meeting other regular volunteers. Adrian's phone buzzed insistently. He glanced at it with a frown. I'm sorry, I need to take this, as he stepped away to answer. Prisha watched him through the window, silhouetted against the harbor lights. In profile, focused on his call, he looked every bit the powerful businessman he was, the world she had deliberately chosen to step away from. When he returned, something had shifted. There's a situation at our Singapore office, he explained, already gathering his things. I need to go. Of course, Prisha said, fighting disappointment. This was his reality: global responsibilities in middle of the night emergencies. He insisted on paying and having his driver take her home despite her protests. At her cottage, a small house at the edge of town with a yard overtaken by experimental plant beds, he walked her to the door. I enjoyed tonight, he said, standing closer than strictly necessary. More than I expected to. Even with the work interruption, she asked with a small smile. Especially with that, he replied. It reminded me what I'm trying to change. In the soft porch light, his expression was earnest, almost vulnerable. For a moment, Prisha thought he might lean in closer. Instead, he stepped back. Good night, Prisha. I hope we see you Sunday. As his car pulled away, Prisha stood on her porch, the proposal folder in her hands, feeling the weight of decisions that extended far beyond business. Seeds had been planted tonight at ease. Possibilities, connections, and like any gardener, she knew that what grew from them would depend on care conditions, and no small amount of faith in the process. Inside, she placed the folder on her kitchen table next to a vase of flowers she'd cut from the garden that morning. Two different worlds now sharing the same space, just as they were beginning to do in her heart. Weathering doubts. The Sunday afternoon garden session arrived with perfect weather and unexpected tension. Prisha had spent days reviewing Adrian's proposal, consulting with community members, and wrestling with her own conflicted feelings. The designs were brilliant, the funding generous, but the potential complications, both professional and personal, left her restless. Her concerns crystallized the moment Adrian's sleek car pulled up to the garden gates. Unlike previous visits, this time a photographer trailed behind him and Theo, snapping photos as they entered. Hope you don't mind, Adrian explained, gesturing to the photographer. Marketing wanted some candidates for the press release about our potential partnership. Press release? Prisha echoed, stomach tightening. We haven't even finalized any agreement. Adrian seemed surprised by her reaction. It's just preliminary. The board is excited about the initiative. Before she could respond, Theo bounded over, eager to show her his sunflower journal. The boy's genuine enthusiasm provided welcome distraction from her unease. The garden was busy with regular volunteers, retirees, families, students fulfilling community service hours. Many cast curious glances at Adrian, whose reputation preceded him. The photographer continued documenting everything, focusing particularly on moments when Adrian and Prisha were together. Miss Prisha, look, Theo called, proudly holding a carrot he'd harvested under the guidance of Mrs. Fernandez, an elderly volunteer. That Prisha praised his work. She noticed Adrian deep in conversation with the head of the local food bank, gesturing toward the expanded garden plans he'd brought along. Were already making connections, leveraging relationships. It was what made him successful. She knew, but something about seeing him operate in her space felt disconcerting. You never mentioned your friend was Adrian Reeves, commented Deepak, a college student who'd been volunteering since the garden's inception. We're just collaborating on a potential project, Prisha explained, aware of how inadequate that description felt. Well, his company just offered me a paid internship after graduation. Deepak grinned, said he was impressed with the irrigation system we designed. Similar stories emerged throughout the afternoon. Adrian connecting with volunteers, offering opportunities, making promises. By the time the session ended, half the garden was buzzing about Horizon Technologies' involvement and the exciting changes coming. You've been quiet, Adrian observed as they walked the garden perimeter after most volunteers had left. Theo was helping Mrs. Fernandez clean tools, entirely content in the old woman's grandmotherly presence. You've been busy, Prisha countered, recruiting my volunteers, planning my garden's future, arranging press coverage, all without consulting me. Adrian stopped walking. Is that how you see it? How else should I see it? You arrived with a photographer and architectural plans before I've even agreed to the partnership. I thought you'd be pleased, Adrian said, genuine confusion in his voice. The board approved twice the initial funding after I showed them the community impact metrics. That's exactly it, Prisha sighed. You're moving at corporate speed, making executive decisions. This garden works differently. We build consensus. We move organically. Everything here grows at its own pace, including trust. Understanding dawned in Adrian's eyes. I overstepped. Yes, I'm not used to patience, he admitted. In my world, hesitation means lost opportunities. And in mine, rushing means damaged relationships. Prisha looked around at the garden, at the years of careful growth. This place exists because people trust each other. That can't be bought or accelerated. Adrian was silent for a moment, watching Theo laugh with Mrs. Fernandez. He's happier here than anywhere else, he said quietly. I want to be part of whatever makes that possible. The simple honesty in his voice softened Priscia's frustration. That's separate from business, she reminded him. Is it? Adrian asked. Can you really separate who we are from what we do? Before she could answer, his phone rang. The familiar look of regret crossed his face as he checked the screen. Take it, she said. We both know you have to, panned out as Adrian stepped away to handle whatever crisis demanded his attention. Priscia wandered over to Theo and Mrs. Fernandez. The contrast couldn't have been more starker. Boy learning to clean garden tools from a woman who had tended plants for 7 decades, while his father negotiated million-dollar decisions on a smartphone. Later that week, photos appeared in local business publications and social media. Adrian Reeves announcing Horizon Technologies' new green initiative partnership with Maplewood Community Garden. Quotes attributed to Priscia spoke of exciting developments and shared vision words she had never spoken. Her phone filled with messages from confused volunteers and community members. The garden's integrity was being questioned, its grassroots authenticity undermined. Worst of all was the doubt creeping into her own heart, doubt about Adrian's intentions, about the wisdom of letting him into her carefully tended world. When he called to invite her to a board presentation, she declined. I think we need to slow down, she told him. This is moving too fast. The project? He asked after a pause. Everything, she answered. Rooted together, week of silence stretched between them, broken only by weather warnings. Another storm was approaching Maplewood, potentially more destructive than the one that had first brought Theo to the garden. Priscia spent days preparing securing structures, covering delicate plants, harvesting what was ready. She was securing the last of the greenhouse windows when a familiar car pulled up. Theo jumped out before it fully stopped, running toward her with something clutched in his hands. Miss Priscia, we came to help. And look, he thrust forward a pot containing his sunflower, now nearly 2 feet tall. Dad said we need to protect it from the storm. Adrian emerged more slowly, carrying supplies, sandbags, tarps, rope. No designer clothes today, just worn jeans and a rain jacket. No phone in sight. I called the community center, he explained. They said you were here preparing for the storm. I thought you could use extra hands. Priscia looked between them, the eager boy and his uncertain father, and nodded. We have a lot to do before it hits. They worked together through the afternoon, Adrian following Priscia's instructions without question or corporate efficiency suggestions. Around them, other volunteers arrived in pairs and small groups, everyone focused on protecting what they'd built together. As the sky darkened and wind began to gust, most volunteers departed with wishes of good luck. Only Priscia remained, doing final checks, when she realized Adrian and Theo were still there, helping an elderly couple secure their prized tomato plants. You should go, she told Adrian when he approached. Get Theo somewhere safe before it hits. Actually, Adrian said, rain beginning to spatter around them, I wanted to give you something first. He handed her a legal document and a flash drive. The revised proposal. No press releases, no corporate takeover, just funding, resources, and technical support with all decisions requiring community approval. And I've canceled all existing publicity. Priscia looked up at him, rain collecting on her eyelashes. Why? Because you were right, he said simply. Some things can't be rushed or controlled. I've spent years believing faster is always better, that efficiency equals success, but that's cost me a lot. He glanced toward Theo, who was carefully placing his sunflower pot in the greenhouse. I don't want to make the same mistakes here. The first serious gust of wind rocked the garden fence, emphasizing his words. Lightning flashed over the sea. You should still go, Priscia insisted. I just need to secure the compost system and lock up. We'll help, Adrian said. Then we'll all go. The storm hit in earnest as they were finishing. Rain pounded horizontally, and the short dash to Adrian's car left them drenched. Instead of driving away immediately, Adrian turned to Priscia. Stay with us tonight, he said. Your cottage is too exposed on the coastline. She hesitated, but another violent gust decided for her. Just until the storm passes. Adrian's home was a surprise, not the modernist mansion rumored in town, but a renovated lighthouse keeper's house, sturdy and practical against coastal weather. Inside, it was warm and unexpectedly homey, with Theo's art covering the refrigerator and books stacked on every surface. That's Theo changed into dry clothes. Adrian showed Priscia to a guest room with a window overlooking the turbulent sea. There are clothes in the drawer, he said. Probably too big but dry. Thank you, she said, suddenly aware of the intimacy of being in his home, accepting his hospitality. Downstairs they gathered in the kitchen. Theo insisted on making hot chocolate like Miss Priscia did for me, while Adrian prepared a simple dinner from what was available. The domesticity of the scene so different from their restaurant dinner or garden. Interactions revealed new dimensions to the man Priscia thought she was beginning to understand. After Theo went to bed, they sat by windows watching the storm, the lighthouse beam sweeping regularly through the darkness. I've been thinking about what you said, Adrian began, about separating who we are from what we do. I'm not sure I can. My work has defined me for so long, shaped how I approach everything, even relationships. That's not necessarily wrong, Prisha said. My approach to relationships is pretty similar to gardening. Create the right conditions. Be patient. Accept that some things are beyond control. Adrian smiled. And how's that working with us? The directness of his question surprised her. Complicated. You represent a world I deliberately left behind. Your resources could help the garden tremendously, but they could also change its essential nature. And then there's Theo... Who? Adores? You, Adrian finished. As do I, I'm realizing. The admission hung between them as lightning illuminated the room. Prisha felt the weight of it, not a casual statement from a man like Adrian Reeves. I'm not asking for decisions tonight, he continued, about the garden partnership or ... anything else. Just acknowledging what's growing here. The storm raged through the night and into morning. When they finally ventured out to check the garden, they found damage, but not destruction. The greenhouse stood intact, protective tarps had held, and though some plants were lost, the roots and infrastructure remained strong. Volunteers gathered throughout the day to help with cleanup. Adrian worked alongside everyone else, Theo proudly showing him how to properly clear debris without damaging surviving plants. No photographers, no corporate logos, no press releases, just a father and son becoming part of a community. In the greenhouse, Priscilla found Theo's sunflower, unharmed but leaning heavily toward the light. It needs a stake, she explained to the boy, something to support it while it grows strong enough to stand alone. Like people, Theo observed with unexpected wisdom, sometimes they need help standing up too. Later, as sunset painted the storm-cleared sky in brilliant colors, Adrian found Prisha planting new seedlings to replace what was lost. Already rebuilding, he noted, kneeling beside her in the soil. That's how gardens work, she replied. There's always another season, another chance to grow. Adrian reached over and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering. I'm beginning to understand that. He glanced around at the recovering garden, at Theo helping nearby, at the volunteers working together. Some things are worth the patience they require. Prisha looked at him, really looked at the man beyond the billionaire label and saw someone changing, growing, like everything else in her garden. Yes, she agreed, covering his soil-stained hand with her own. They are. As evening settled around them, the three walked together through the garden, not separate worlds colliding anymore, but something new taking root, weathered by storms but stronger for having endured them. Theo ran ahead, then turned back to them with a child's simple observation. We look like a family, don't we? Adrian and Priscilla exchanged glances, neither rushing to define what was still growing between them. We look like people who care about each other, Priscilla answered carefully, and about the same things. That's a good start, Adrian said, his hand finding hers as naturally as plants reach for sunlight. And in the garden where it all began, that seemed enough, and now a promise of seasons to come, of patience rewarded, and of love that, like the most resilient of plants, could flourish even after storms.